Thank you everyone for joining us. It's so nice to see so many of you here again this week. Today we're going to be talking about the two main medical admissions tests, the UCAT and the BMAT. The UCAT in particular is closing in quickly. I'd sort of not realised that it was June, which meant that the registration window opens in just a few weeks. I believe that's right, Dylan, isn't it, for the UCAT?
Yes, it's opening.
Yeah, in fact, it's been open for 3 days, so you can start. You'll be able to book your test in just 3 weeks and start doing the test just 4 weeks after that. So it's getting close. But before we go any further, we should introduce ourselves. My name is Matt. I look after research here at UniAdmissions. So my job is to make sure that everything that we put forward in these presentations is based in data and is all based in stuff that we can prove works. Dylan, who are you? Why are you here?
Yes, thanks, Matt. My name is Dylan. I'm an admissions consultant, so I speak to all of our new students and parents. If there are any new students and parents watching, I do urge you to book a call with me and we can discuss your applications. But yes, my job is I just spend my day speaking to people that want to go to university and study various subjects, and it's very interesting. So it's good to be here.
Fab. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're talking about medicine admissions tests this week. Next week, we'll be talking about choosing between Oxford and Cambridge. So hopefully those of you who are thinking about Oxford will join us again for that one. Obviously, those of you who are thinking about medical school, the content in both is going to be relevant to you. So without further ado, medical admissions tests. So I've split this into 3 broad categories. The first is the question of why do there need to be tests? Medicine is somewhat unique in that it has these tests almost regardless of where you want to study. So why is it that these tests exist when equivalent tests don't exist for economics or for English or for maths? We'll then be talking about the 2 main UK tests, the BMAT and the UCAT, walking you through what the format of those tests is. And then we'll be talking about how much the tests matter, which is where we get some graphs out, which is always my favourite part of the presentation, even if it isn't always. So why do they need to be tests? An unbelievable number of people trying to become doctors at the moment. Nurses as well. I've no idea why. I don't believe anything has happened in recent weeks and months to motivate people to study medicine, but that is the way of it, and that's what people want. So that's the first thing, that an awful lot of people are trying to get into medicine. The second thing is, and this is just straight from the UCAS website, the moment you look up medicine or dentistry, it says to get a medical or dentistry now, that means that you really don't have very many options when it comes to your grades if you want to study medicine or dentistry. You need to be getting the absolute top marks. And even with the absolute top marks, these courses are still really competitive to get onto. So the way I like to think about this is through a little bit of a test. Maybe we'll test Dylan. Take advantage of him. So Dylan, can you tell me which of these lines is the longest? Not the pointy bits at the end, but the line itself.
Yeah, I'll just go for the middle one.
Okay, so this is an illusion called the Myers-Lyell illusion, and of course the lines are all the same length, but the positions of the little arrows at the ends makes it look as though they are of differing lengths. The reason I bring this up is we're talking about the logic behind having these tests in the first place. And the challenge for university administrators, admissions officers, is when you have a lot of students who all look more or less the same because they've all got brilliant grades, you have to come up with some kind of way of choosing between them. Because all of these students, although they're different, our 3 students here, they're all different shapes, they've all got different pointing arrows on the ends of them, but their exam results are all exactly the same. They've all got 3 A stars. And so while they might look different, and obviously they are different people, you can't actually tell which one of them is the most academically able from the information you have available. Which brings us, I expect Dylan was expecting this one, to the pie chart. Dylan, tell us about the famous pie chart.
Indeed, thank you. So just to build off what Matt was saying, the universities, if everyone's writing A levels and IB, and everyone's getting great grades, which is usually the case for medicine applicants, especially if you've had a look at the A level requirements. So you guys are a bright bunch. So the issues for the universities is, well, how do we tell them apart? And this is how, and it's important for you guys to understand the weighting of each part of your application. I think just so that you know how much importance to put on each part and just how much time you should be spending on these parts, because I speak to a lot of students and some of them think that because they have good grades, that's immediate entry. And that's not the case. So if we look at the pie chart, you can have a look and see that we have a look at the big chunks first. So the blue one is actually your exam grade. So that's how much your A levels, more predominantly your GCSEs will have on your application. So essentially, right, that's a 30% weighting on your application, which leaves 70%. The 70%, you can see a big chunk is made up of your admissions test score. And Matt, you might want to come in. I don't know if the weighting might go up because of grades. That's a question that's been coming up. Predicted grades.
It wouldn't be a surprise at all. Again, if you're trying to compare, say, 10 students who have all got the same A-level grades, then you have to look at the personal statement and the reference and things, but the main thing you have to compare them is the admission. Because the grades are all the same. If you're trying to tell who is, if you're trying to tell who is the, I don't know, the fastest and they're all the same height, then you have to test them through a race, right?
Exactly. And the fairest way, if there was an unfair, whatever the reason was for exams, the next fairest way is the admissions test. And that's why, like Matt says, it's a race, it's a competition. You can view it that way if you like. And so it has a big weighting, 30%. Some universities, you have to score in the top in order to make it to interview. For example, Oxford is one of those. If you don't score highly in the admissions test, this could hurt your application later. All right, so it's very much in your best interest to make sure that you score highly in the UCAT and the BMAT. The final part there in gray is your interviews. So if you do well and the universities are interested in you guys, they will interview you overall as part of your whole application. When they comparing you with the other students, the interview will have a 30% weighting. So also a big part. So you want to hone in on your communication skills. You want to develop your answers because as with everything, it's a competition to get in. And this is how each race, how important each race is, if we use Matt's analogy, right? And then the final bit, everything else, you might be wondering what's included in there. So that would be your personal statement, your school references, any work experience that you might have done, things like that.
Thanks, Dylan. I hadn't unmuted for a second there.
That's okay.
So as Dylan mentioned, there are these admissions tests. Now, the two main admissions tests you'll be thinking about are first of all, the BMAT. The BMAT, it stands for Biomedical Admissions Test. And it's required for a lot of the top universities, Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, UCL, Leeds, and a few others. The BMAT is a handwritten exam. So you sit down at a desk, they give you a piece of paper, you get a pencil out, a kind of classic old-fashioned exam. And it's split into three parts. So the first part is verbal and numerical reasoning. So that's questions of logic presented through words and questions of logic presented through maths. There's then a scientific knowledge section, which tests your knowledge of biology, chemistry, and physics. And then there's an essay section, which tests the quality of your writing and your argument. We're going to be looking in detail at the way the BMAT is scored in a few slides' time, so as to give you a really good sense of how the different parts of the exam matter to your chances of getting in. Now, usually the BMAT is sat twice, once in September and once in November, but because of the virus, this year the BMAT is only being sat once in November. Now, the thing to understand here is previously you could do the BMAT in September and then make your choices of universities based on how you feel it went. So if you felt like you had done really badly in the BMAT, you could choose to more UCAT ice creams, universities. that's what I'm thinking about. You could choose to apply to more UCAT universities if you've done well on the UCAT and poorly on the BMAT, or vice versa. This time, you're not going to have that opportunity because you're not going to have done the BMAT until after you've sent off your application on the 15th of October. This is a good example of where it really helps to speak with one of our consultants, as they'll be able to guide you based on the amount of preparation you've done, the kinds of scores you might be getting in practice papers, particularly through our test prep platform, all those sorts of things to pick out the right 5 universities, or 4 universities in the case of medicine for you. Because what you don't want to do is pick 3 BMAT universities, have a really bad day of the BMAT, and then find that you've sort of made a real mess of your application this year. That's where advice can come in really handy. The other test that you might find yourself sitting, you should probably do both, I'd strongly recommend it, is the UCAT, the University Clinical Aptitude Test. Now, the UCAT is quite different from MET in a number of ways. It's the exam required for a lot of medical schools, King's where I went, Exeter, Glasgow, Keele, some really, really excellent medical schools there, King's in particular. And unlike the BMAT, it is a computer-based exam. So it's one that you're going to be testing centre, probably a Pearson testing centre, sitting alongside a bunch of other students sitting in front of computers. The test dates are from the 28th of July, I think is the first day you can take it, right through until the end of September. So if you're really confident in your revision for the BMAT, for the UCAT, sorry, you can take it earlier or you can take it later. Of course, you can't resit it to see if you can get a better score. It isn't like the GRE or the SAT. Sadly, once you've done it, you've done it. So it's one worth thinking about when you want to take it. Now, the other thing to know about the UCAT is that it is an aptitude test rather than a test of knowledge. So the test is not, do you know anything about being a doctor? It's, do you have the mental skills to develop that knowledge later? As such, it doesn't have much in the way of science questions. Those questions that test your knowledge of biology, your knowledge of physics, those appear in the BMAT, but in the UCAT, they're going to be focusing on your cognitive abilities. So the verbal reasoning and the quantitative reasoning, those are very similar to what you'll find in the BMAT in terms of the level of difficulty. But the decision making, which presents you with different scenarios that you might face as a doctor, is quite different, as is the situational judgment test, which again presents you with scenarios taken from what you might expect as a doctor to try and understand how well the way that you think about ethical problems, about your relationships with others, about working with patients, how well the approaches that you have already in your mind, how well those fit with the way that medical ethics and medical practice sort of demand that you work. And you also have the abstract reasoning. The abstract reasoning I find incomprehensible and is all to do with pattern recognition and with funny shapes. I think probably, oh, sorry about that. I think probably in a few weeks' time, we will spend a whole one of these webinars talking about the different types of UCAT question. I may even torture Dylan by asking him to answer some of them. And that'll give you a chance to have a look at some of these question types in more detail. Because I think that would be really valuable in terms of presenting different strategies for the UCAT, as it is quite different from an exam you'll have sat at school. because as I mentioned earlier, it's not about what you know, it's about how you think. And while it's very easy to revise things to know them, it's really quite hard to revise the way that you think. The other thing to know about the UCAT is that as part of the way it runs on the computers, it is generated from a pool of questions. So there will be well over 1,000 different questions that you could be asked, and you will only be asked a subset of those questions. So the exam that each person sits of the UCAT is unique, which is why that there is this much longer testing window, because of course, if the test was the same each time, it would be very difficult to keep it a secret and people would share what the questions were. That's how they found their way around that. So the last thing to talk about is how big a deal are these tests? From what I understood from your comments earlier, Dylan, this is a question that comes up a lot, right?
Yes. So every student we speak to, if you want to apply for medicine, you're going to have to write one of these. There's no getting around it. So yes, every call we speak about how important it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's easy to say, oh, something's very important, but I like to put numbers on these things. So what I've got here is, this is the distribution of scores in the BMAT last year. So this is for everyone. That little graphic, that little label has stuck around. I should have got rid of that. This is for everyone who sat the BMAT last year, so in 2020. Now, what you can see here, I'm just going to get the pointer in. This is a good opportunity to do a little bit of pointing. You can see that the curve forms a lovely regular bell curve of the kind you would expect from any normally distributed data set. You notice that hardly anyone, I didn't mean to do that, hardly anyone gets down here in the lowest scores. The reason for this is that the BMAT is a multiple choice exam. So in section 1, which is what we're looking at here, you would be looking at 32 questions, and each one of them has 5 possible answers. Now, with 32 attempts, it's actually very difficult to get none of them right. Really very impressive, given a 20% chance each time to not get any of them right. In fact, it's really very difficult to not get something in the region of 4.5 to 4.5 to not get quite a few of the questions right. So what, 20% of 30, so you would expect them to get just over 6 right each time. And what you see, if we count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a very steep increase just here as people line up with the average number of correct answers you would get if you were purely guessing. Similarly, it's very difficult to get all of the answers right. That looks like that was 1 or 2 people to me down here at the other end of the scale. And that again is part of the multiple choice thing. No matter how many of the answers you know, it's very difficult to get 32, to flip heads, well, something like 115 times. It will be the equivalent of getting heads that many times in a row. Now to have a look for a moment at how this translates into results, sorry. So we have here the distribution of scores for BMAT section 1 from this last year. Now, if we look at where the actual scores are, so the average score was a 4.5, which is how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's 16 out of 32 is the average score on the BMAT in last year's sitting of it. Now, half of students score more, half of students score less. Now, the average student who is choosing to apply to UCL is scoring 2 points higher. So that's 2 more right answers than the average student. Only 2 out of 32 questions. Not a huge number, but still a meaningful improvement. And then the average offer holder, and this is what I really emphasize here, is a further 1, 2, 3 correct answers. Now, 3 correct answers is not beyond the revision powers of anyone. If you spend the time and the effort on it, you can get those 3 extra right answers. because those 3 right answers is all that separates the average applicant from the average offer holder. If you can get 4 or 5 right answers, you'll notice that the curve drops off really steeply towards the end in 3 or 4 correct answers time from here. Those students, the top 6 or 7% of students, they are only getting 5 or 6 more correct answers than the average UCL applicant, and only 8 or 9 more than the average applicant. This is something that is completely possible to achieve with revision, because we are really talking about really small marginal improvements making a really big difference in terms of your score. Every one of those right answers is pushing you up from 55 to 60 to 65 to 70% of students being worse than you. One question, 5% of people are suddenly being shoved behind you. In section 2, which is the scientific knowledge section, we see an even steeper impact here. As you can see, there is a very smooth move up and a quite steep drop down on the other side of the graph. That's because section 2 is just harder. Many fewer students score highly in section 2, and there is much more clustering around the mean. Again, this shows just how much that difference of revision can make. You're not jumping over 5% of students here. At the midpoint of this, you can be jumping over 6, 7, or 8% of the number of students by getting an extra couple of questions right. If you go from, say, a 4 up to a 4.8, you're overtaking 15% of the people who've sat this test, and that's 2 correct answers. Finally, I'm just going to look at section 3, which is the essay section. The essay section is a very interesting contrast with the rest of it, because as you can see, pretty much everyone gets a 3. A few people, and they tend to be students applying from abroad, because there are a very large number of students who optimistically apply to UK medical schools from abroad. Very few of them get in for reasons we'll probably discuss in the Q&A. Almost everyone who is applying with native English, with English as their first language, is going to get a 3 or a 3.5. Some of them will get a 2.5, a few of them will get a 4. Essentially, no one gets a 5. It basically never happens, just as no one gets a 0 or a 0.5. And hardly anyone gets anything other than a 2 or more. So realistically, if we're looking at the BMAT essay, almost everyone gets a 3. Some people get a 2.5, some people get a 3.5 or a 4. But the clustering there is extremely clear. And when we look at the quality of English, as you can see, even clearer, pretty much everyone gets an A. A handful of people get a B, but pretty much everyone is going to get an A. As you would expect, the correlation between the results in section 3 and whether you get in or not is extremely weak. This, of course, being because everyone gets pretty much the same score in section 3, so it sort of doesn't matter. That isn't to say that you shouldn't revise for the essay, but if it's a choice between spending an extra few hours on physics problems, an extra day on biology, or trying to polish up your English, you should definitely be spending that time on revising biology. So I wanted to look again at the BMAT scores. These are again from last year. As you can see, that median score is there, hovering around 14 out of 35. Sorry, this is from the 2019 data set, when it was still 35 questions. And you only have to get another 7 or 8 correct answers to go from being right in the middle of the pack to being in the top 10%. If we look again at the example of UCL, this is from the previous year, that gap is even smaller. We're only looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 answers. It takes you from being an average applicant to being an average offer holder. Now, these gaps are a little bit bigger in the 2019 data set because we're looking at a 35 question rather than a 32 question exam, but the same lesson sort of holds. The longer you spend studying for the BMAT, the longer you spend studying for the UCAT, those extra correct answers, those 2 or 3 or 4 extra right answers that you're getting in there are making a huge difference, because going from 15 out of 35 to 20 out of 35, from 16 out of 32 to 19 out of 32, that takes you from having maybe an 18–19% chance of getting in to suddenly a 52–53% chance of getting in. It really makes a spectacular difference. So, Dylan, speaking of a spectacular difference, tell us about our premium programs.
Awesome. Yes, thanks, Matt, for all of that on the UCAT and the BMAT. So for those of you that aren't already working with us, then it's worth knowing that we run premium programs for medicine students. So this is our strongest, one of our strongest subjects. Our director, Rohan, started the company as a medic. So we have a wealth of experience helping with the UCAT and the BMAT. Interviews, personal statements, everything you saw on that pie chart that we discussed earlier will be included in the premium program. But how is that broken up? So we can look into it and see how exactly we help you. So the first part is you'll actually get resources for everything that you need for each part of your application. So we're going to assume that your school has taken good care of you and you're a sound student. Well, I'm not going to, I say assume lightly because I will also ask you on the phone. And you'll have to tell me. But we assume that your school's taking care of your A-levels and your academics. So for us, we'll be concerned with your personal statement, UCAT, BMAT, and interviews. And so for that, we have resources for each part of your application. So this is textbooks. We have an online portal, which I'll show you a little bit about later on. But the portal's an online version of a study guide where you can practice tests. You can go through videos. You can go through ebooks and essentially go through your application preparation online.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I just wanted to add on the question of the textbooks. I had the great misfortune last year to edit the BMAT textbook. It is 620 pages long. It weighs over 2 kilograms. It's only in size 11 font. It is one hell of a textbook, and that's one of the resources that's included in our programs. It is unbelievably heavy.
Yes, it's massive. Yeah. And you get that and more. So we have one for the UCAT for things that you might not think of as well. So if you're thinking of applying to Oxbridge, we have materials on college selection and things like that. So just absolutely all the resources that you need to get through your application.
Are you ready for the prep portal, Dylan? Because that's the next slide.
Indeed. So the prep portal, does the video play?
Well, the video plays, but as you know, it's very fast.
It's very fast. We're going to give it a go. Okay, so.
Oh, no, it didn't play. Sorry.
It didn't play. Okay, well, if you go back to the next line, I can just explain the outline. It might be playing. So our prep portal, you can, if the video does play, just have a look through it. But you can see as it's going through that it will essentially cover each part of your application. So that was actually trigonometry. So it's physics. You'd have your own versions of the UCAT and the BMAT. And so you can go through everything at your own pace. There are simulated test environments on the side. This at the moment is revision, so it's not actually timed. And you can just go through your questions, just practice and practice. As Matt said, a few questions can actually put you in the upper brackets. And that's the whole point of the portal, is that you get that practice in. Once you finish your revision, you simulate your tests. And this is where you've seen where you're learning, your revision, if it's actually turned into anything. You practice a paper, it's in a timed environment, and you check your score. Now, given that the scores that Matt's gone through so nicely for us, you want to compare your scores and just keep going. Right, you've got a lot of time. If you're applying this year, then you've still got time. You want to make sure you get the preparation in. Those few questions, like Matt said, can make a difference on which offers you get, how many offers you get. A large part of my role is talking to reapplicants. So you don't want to be that person. You want to make sure you make the most out of this year's application. That is the prep portal. The next part is we have enrichment seminars. So these are Sunday seminars. They happen every weekend. I would say make these your favorite parts of your weekend. So they essentially discussions, uni-grade discussions, and they're completely medical focused. So to give you some examples, 1 week they might be discussing diagnosis or clinical trials or empathy, but something specific to medicine. And the whole reason really is that you want to have a greater base knowledge. Understand that your university application is a competition. You are going to be competing with other students. And so the whole point of these is that we want to enrich, quote unquote, enrich your mind so that you stand out and have a far greater base knowledge, wider reading profile than most of the other students that you'll be applying against.
Thanks, Dylan. The next thing to think about are the day courses that we offer. Obviously, it's wonderful to spend time with other students through the enrichment seminars, but sometimes you really want to drill down and focus for a full day, particularly on the admissions test, but also on the personal statement and most of all the interview, to really build your confidence and get a really focused little bit of preparation in there. The day courses, these focus on the admissions test and the interview. They take place, at the moment, the plan is for them to be online over a weekend, I think. But we have in the past done them in person. And these are a really great opportunity for you to really focus in your work and do it in a kind of focus setting with other people, sort of maintain your motivation. Dylan, can you tell us a little bit about one-to-one tuition?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so as Matt says, the day courses will be spread out throughout the year. So for each hurdle of your application, you'll have one, and they're used to tie up the tuition that you'll be doing with your tutor. So essentially, we'll give you a mentor or tutor, someone that's going to help you with each part of your application. It's completely one-to-one. So we'd usually assign the tutor because we have a lot of experienced medics that have studied medicine themselves. They have a range of backgrounds. And so what I'd like to do is match a tutor that's similar to yourself. Hopefully that's been to the same university that you want to go to. And from there, they'll help you with each part of your application. So it's worth saying, though, that we do introduce 4 more tutors at interview stage. And that's just so that we can recreate the interview environment. You know, you're not going to know who you're going to be interviewed by. And so we want to make sure that you've had enough practice, enough experience communicating these things that you've learned. And we do that with 4 extra tutors. So 1 main tutor throughout the year, and then interview stage, 4 tutors to give mock interviews and feedback. And that's all on a one-to-one basis.
Fab, thanks, Dylan. One of the things that we hear a lot from parents about the one-to-one tuition is they don't know what their students have been up to, their children have been up to. And so we do make sure that after each one-to-one tuition session, both parent and student are sent a report recapping what they've been talking about, the work they've been doing, the quality of their responses, and areas for further improvement, which are hugely helpful when it comes to making sure that young people are on track, because they're not always the most communicative with their parents. It's certainly my memory of what I was like at the relevant age. Sorry about the police driving past. I'm sure it's important. Just wait for them to pass. And the really good news is that our results really bear out the work that we put in. The share of our students who receive offers for Oxbridge, including medicine, is around 3 times the national average, and our figure for medicine is even higher, with something of the order of 80% of our students getting at least 1 offer to study medicine. These results compare really favourably with even the top schools in the country, your Etons and your Westminsters. Our playing fields, our buildings aren't quite as nice, but our results are just as good, which is something that we're extremely proud of. People have a lot less things to say about us on Trustpilot as well. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please do drop in a note on there to say how much you've enjoyed it, particularly emphasizing how nice Dylan and I are. That'll please everyone. And finally, before we go to the Q&A and start thinking about your questions and also booking consultations, I wanted to briefly talk about the 2-week trial. So I'm sure, Dylan, you speak to a lot of parents who are a little anxious about coming to work with us.
Yes, so this is just really a opportunity this is just really an opportunity for parents and for us to make sure that the student is right for any of our programs. So, you know, I will spend some time with the student usually, or one of the other consultants. And what we will do is go through your academic profile, make sure that we can indeed help you get into the medicine school of your choice. And you will also, obviously, we want to give you an opportunity to do the same with us, after which would expect full commitment to go and study and work hard on achieving your offer. So that 2-week cooling off period is an opportunity for us to evaluate you and you to us, and just make sure that you can indeed commit to the program fully afterwards.
Yeah, we don't want to work with students who it turns out aren't right for us, or we're not right for them. And so those 2 weeks are all about making sure that we've got a good match. Making sure we've got enough dates before we get engaged, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And finally, I wanted to talk briefly about the foundation. Last year, we were fortunate enough to work with nearly 100 students on a reduced fee or a no fee basis for our services. Our target is to work with 250 students on the same subsidized basis this year. And by 2022 to be in a position where for every student who comes to us on a paid for basis, another student is working with us on a free or a heavily subsidized basis. So if you've enjoyed this presentation, if you've thought that you'd like to come work with us, that the stuff we have to offer is really good, we're delighted. But if you're worried about money, please do get in touch, because it's highly likely that we too are worried about whether you can afford it, but we're actually going to be able to help. So if you feel like it might be a little bit out of your price range, don't let that put you off. Please get in touch nevertheless, and we will see what we can do, because it's highly likely we will have some kind of reduced fee option available for you. So that brings us to the end of the slides. This little animation is now going to illustrate how to book a consultation with us, which is what I very much recommend. That gives you the chance to speak to Will, to Dylan, to other Will, to James, to any of the consultants in our team, to really get a clear idea of how we can help you on a personalized basis. And so I'll start off on the questions. So first off, for the easy ones, Kaung Suthinayin asks, I'm currently applying for the consultation, and I want to know if the time slot is in my time zone or in yours. So all of these time slots are based on UK time, I think.
Yes, yeah. So they all UK time. So there's sometimes a confusion. So all of them, when you book a call with one of us, will come through to us as our time. So if I get a call booked for 9:10, then I'll give you a call 9:10 UK time.
There you go. So make sure to take that into account so that we're not phoning you up while you're asleep, which no one wants. We certainly don't want to be waking you up, and I don't imagine you want to be woken either. We had the usual question about the recording. So the recording of this is available on the website. It will go up normally on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, but I believe there's also an archive of these going back months and months and months. So if you've really, really enjoyed it, you can watch loads of them. I don't recommend it because not even my wife enjoys that much of my company, but they are very much there if you'd like to take a look at them. And this one should be up in the next few days. So Aaron Craig asks, do we do support only for the BMAT or for the UCAT as well? We have substantial support available for the BMAT and the UCAT. I simply focused on the BMAT today because it's the exam I prefer of the two, but we have our support for the UCAT is just as good and just as thorough. it's simply in the interest of time, because I don't like to make this an hour-long presentation of which 45 minutes are graphs. So I chose to focus on the BMAT today, but we do just as much work on the UCAT. Grania Sweeney asks, will the BMAT be online this year? I think it's unlikely. I think the reason they've cancelled the September BMAT is to try really hard to have it back to the normal format of paper in person this year. So, you know, really going for the safe option of not having a September version at all. Probably the reason for this is, as you may well know, Grania, the BMAT Online last year did not work well. There were a lot of problems. Hundreds of students that we spoke to had difficulties, and the universities are really keen to avoid that this year. So I think it's very unlikely that it will be going back to the online format, because it didn't go well last year, and I don't think anyone involved was pleased with the outcome. And we have a couple of another question about the UCAT. So the UCAT, I've had a quick check with the UCAT consortium and Pearson today, as it happens. So the UCAT tests and the BMAT as well. The UCAT is being carried out principally through Pearson View exam centres, which you can find all around the world. And the BMAT will be much the same for people outside of the UK, people in the UK. The BMAT, you should be able to sit at your school, which should be a registered centre. But the exam formats themselves are unchanged. And the UCAT, they're very much expecting to be able to do it at the Pearson centres in the UK. And I expect that will be the case elsewhere in the world, but I will have a check. While Dylan tells you about what time of the year do the interviews tend to take place, in answer to Aaron's question.
Yeah, sure. Interviews tend to be in December for medicine. They can run over into January if they're late, but a good time to aim for is December.
Yeah. Oxford and Cambridge certainly will be before Christmas. And other universities will sometimes interview all the way through into March as they work through the number of students they want to talk to. So it's worth having a good plan in place. On the other hand, if you're not able to travel to the UK, I'm sure there'll be an online option, particularly after all the disruption of this year. And it's also worth bearing in mind that Oxford and Cambridge will also have interviewers out in Singapore and Hong Kong this year again. So if you're applying to Cambridge from, I don't know, Guangxi, then you will be able to just get the train over to Hong Kong and have your interview there rather than going all the way out to Cambridge. Although, of course, going to Cambridge is nice, and so we do recommend it. Yeah. Let's look at some further questions. Forward, which is more difficult, the UCAT or the BMAT? I would say the UCAT is probably more difficult, simply because it isn't based around knowledge. It's based around sort of habits of thinking. The abstract reasoning particularly I find very tricky. Other people find it an absolute breeze, but it requires a real concentration of revision, because it's a very strange test compared with the BMAT or compared with anything that you're likely to have studied at school. Linda asks, can you take the UCAT and the BMAT a year ahead as a trial run? Yeah, that's fine. The universities probably won't be able to tell on it, and we were very much recommended actually as a strategy, right, Dylan?
Yes. So we start in some cases, if the parents do and students reach out to us in time, the earliest we'll actually start preparing students for an application is in their year 10. And that is one of the things that we might indeed do. Obviously, it's a little bit less desirable if you're in your year 12 year, unless you plan on having a gap year. But yes, if you've got the time, then why not?
Yeah. We had a question about Singapore. All these tests will be taking place at the Pearson View Centre in Singapore, or else at the British Capital Office. But Singapore is one of the easiest places to apply to university in the UK from, so I'm sure you'll be fine. And yeah, Aaron mentions practice questions and mock exams. Yeah, these are both really effective. We produce a UCAT textbook, which is part of our program. as well as being available on Amazon. The UCAT as well, because it's a computer-based exam, really benefits from preparation through something like our prep portal, as it allows you to practice what the exam will feel like once you're in there. As I've talked to a lot of students over the years who get really thrown off by the sort of weird computer format of these things if they're not used to it. How many interviews are there? Aisha asks. So we'll be talking in more detail about medical interviews probably as we head towards the autumn, once that's sort of more in season. But it's likely that if you are invited for an interview at a medical school, you'll be there for a few hours. You may have 2 or 3 interviews, and there are also the multiple mini interviews, the MMIs, which we'll also talk about in due course, where you have a series of short interviews, maybe 10 minutes long each, on different themes. Yunju asks about whether interviews take place only after the written exams. That's right. So the exams are used to, the written tests, the BMAT and the UCAT are used to create a shortlist of applicants. That shortlist is then interviewed, and then the decisions are made based on how they perform in the interview. So you'll have to do the test first, and you won't know until after you've done the test and the university has looked at it, whether you want to have an interview or not. And obviously not all students, not all applicants are interviewed by any stretch of the imagination. And Indrani asks about the case of King's College London in particular, but I expect this will be relevant across the board, which is whether interviews will be online or not. So my understanding at the moment is that the universities didn't very much enjoy doing them online last year, and we're trying to avoid it this year. However, it will depend on the circumstance of the virus, the circumstance of international travel. But I've spoken to a couple of people at Oxford, in particular, where I have better contacts, and what they've told me is that they hated doing them online. It was rubbish. The students didn't like it. The professors didn't like it. The technology didn't work consistently. No one enjoyed the experience, and so they won't do it this year unless they absolutely have to. Because it was a very unpopular way of doing things. Now, I think that is all the questions we've had come in so far. If you have any others, please do drop them in now. Otherwise, I will set Dylan free and we will go about the rest of our lives. Do you have any exciting plans for the weekend, Dylan?
No, not much, although I am going to play tennis this evening, but I'm thinking of maybe a barbecue tomorrow. It's definitely the weather for it. Well, what about you?
That sounds brilliant. I don't have a barbecue, but I might be able to convince my father-in-law to hold one. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm just looking forward to it, enjoying the sun and perhaps going down and sitting by the sea. That'd be convenient from where I live. Yeah. Yeah. But thank you very much. I'll just take one final question from Farwad. Yes, it is a good idea to do the BMAT and the UCAT. Do the UCAT obviously first because it is first. See how it goes. You can then make an informed decision about whether you want to apply to more BMAT universities or more UCAT universities. We would recommend in every instance, I think, that you do both. They test different things. And it gives you just a broader selection of universities to choose from when you come to apply. And particularly because both of them are very hard, it's good to have 2 bites at the apple that way by having done both. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to set Dylan free, and we're going to go and enjoy the sunshine. So Dylan, say goodbye.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. If you did want to ask any more questions or wanted to discuss our programs, book a call either with myself or one of the other consultants and we'll have a chat.
Fantastic. And it's goodbye from me as well. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. And we'll see you next week when we'll be talking about choosing between Oxford and Cambridge. The correct answer is Cambridge.